ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमः ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्ण। Yes, Gopinath Prabhu, we are all set for the 15th chapter today.
Yes, Prabhu. The second part of the 15th chapter.
Yes. So let's begin with a review of what we discussed in the last session. We we gave an overview of chapter 15, where Krishna speaks about this material world as a reflection of the spiritual world. Uh, we see that in this world there are so many desires and there are so many expectations that each and every one of us has, but somehow the experience of everyone is that these desires remain unfulfilled and frustrated. So there must be something um, wrong in the basics. Basic में राड़ा बोलते हैं ना, BMR, basic में राड़ा. So something must be amiss, because of which everyone desires that lasting, everlasting happiness, everlasting love, everlasting relationships, but things don't last. They degrade. They they kind of are not up to the expectations, up to the mark. So then we discuss that how this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So in a reflection, the object is kind of its perception is there, but then when you try to touch it and experience it, you don't get that experience. The mango in the reflection, it's quite visible that a mango uh, of the proper shape and size is there in the reflection, but once you pursue that mango, you are frustrated. So Gita begins the 15th chapter with discussing that there is the real happiness, real joy, real love, real eternal relationships, but they exist in the spiritual world, and we are in this reflection of the material world. And then Krishna says this is a tree, vast tree. The tree of our desires has created the tree of this material world. And Krishna is suggesting the best way and the only way to deal with this complex myriad of this material world is to cut this tree of desires, material desires, and thus cut the tree of our material entanglement. And what weapon do you use to cut this tree? The weapon of knowledge and detachment. And so that's something which can solve all our problems in this life and forever. Hmm? Then we also discussed that yes, definitely we should try to solve the problems of this world to on the practical level, but then we should understand that even though we might kind of create the best of situations, but this world is a jagat, constantly changing, and we ourselves are not permanent residents of this place, so we need to prepare for the next world. And so that is something we discussed. And then finally we also discussed about that how it is Krishna who maintains the material world and the spiritual world, and a devotee has faith in Krishna, and he understands that it is not my own efforts, my own possessions which are giving me protection and maintenance. It is Krishna who is giving me protection and maintenance. So these are some things we did discuss in the previous session. Let's see what we can cover today.
Yes, Prabhu. Should we begin with the question and answer?
Yes, Prabhu. Yes, we can begin.
So the first question is, if we are indeed qualitatively Satchit and Ananda, and if once we go to the spiritual world or the Dham of the Lord, it is said that we never return.
Hmm.
And that is a direct translation of a shlok from the Pandradhyay.
Hmm.
Then if we, yes,
Yad
Prabhu.
gatva na nivartante tad dhama
Namo
paramam.
paramam mama. And yet we see that our current state is that we are here in this material world. So how do we resolve the fact that we are both at the highest qualitatively Sachidananda, and at the same time the fact that we are now bound up in this material world?
Hmm. Yes, this is a question which has intrigued and countless people, countless devotees, and not only intrigued but also confused and left them wondering that whether they are, because of this one question, every other concept of the philosophy has been questioned.
Yes,
So
I
it's
think
very
it's called
important.
I think controversially it's called the fall of the Jiva, Prabhu.
Yeah, the Jiva fall down issue, so to speak. So now when Krishna says that natat bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavaka tad gatva na nivartante tad dhama paramam mama. So once having attained that abode, one doesn't come back. Okay, so one doesn't come back to this material world. So then how are we here? Because originally we are parts and parcels of the Lord. So we have we fallen from the spiritual world, or how is it that if we were in the spiritual world originally, and there is this axiom that no one falls from the spiritual world, so then the question arises, how did we come here? Because number one axiom is no one falls from the spiritual world. And if we assume that we were originally out there in the spiritual world, then we have fallen, which actually uh, uh, falsifies the first statement. So therefore, it becomes difficult to grasp. So therefore, to understand this particular subject matter, this concept, we need to, there's no yes or no answer. We need to understand the nuances. And I will explain why is it that it is not a yes or no answer. Why is it that it has to be a nuanced answer? So we'll see all of that. We begin with. Now, let's begin with what Krishna describes. Krishna, now I'll read for you the third verse of this chapter. न रूपमस्येहमर्षोपलक्ष्यते नान्तो न चादिर्न च सम्प्रतिष्ठा अश्वत्थमेनं सुविरूढमूलम् असङ्गशस्त्रेण दृढेन चित्वा. To understand the subject matter, it is very important to keep this particular verse in mind, because for us the authority is Krishna's word. All the acharyas, they are giving their commentaries to actually reinforce Krishna's instructions, Krishna's words in the Gita. So let's go back to the origin, because the question is about origin. Where did we all come from? So हमारे सबके origin, at least after going through 15 chapters of the Gita, we can understand that our origin is Krishna. So let's hear from the origin's mouth how to understand this, how to understand the question, where have we come from. So Krishna is saying here, na rupam asyeha tatopalabhyate nanto na chadir na cha sampratishtha. So he's talking about this vast network of this material world, which is in the form of a gigantic ashwatha tree, inverted tree, which has its branches dangling and entangling all around, with secondary roots sprouting from everywhere, and it's a complete mess, enmeshed together. So कई बार अगर आपका कोई just we have this Brahman thread. Brahman thread, if it gets tangled, it's very difficult to untangle it, because there are 6 rows, and which has gone into what, it's so difficult. So Krishna is saying the real form of tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. So now the question which we are asking, where have we originally come from? So Krishna is saying, you cannot understand. No one can understand where this tree began. Now Krishna has proclaimed that, Mr. Gopinath, you are very wise, you are very intelligent, and you are inquisitive, and you have asked this question, where did I originate from? Did I come from the spiritual world? And I have heard that no one goes back, falls from the spiritual world. How is it then I, in the first place, fell from the spiritual world? So Krishna is saying, wait a minute, have some patience. First, understand that there are some things you cannot understand. Krishna is saying, no one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. So when you accept spiritual life, you accept that there are 3 pramanas: Pratyaksha Praman, Anuman Praman, and Shabda Praman. Pratyaksha are things which we can see and perceive through our sensory perceptions. Anuman is which we can interpolate or extrapolate based on our logic. And then Shabda Praman is things which are beyond the purview of our senses, and the faulty senses and faulty intelligence. We can get access to them through Shabda. And we have come thus far through the medium of Shabda. And now Shabda himself personified is telling us, I have been telling you some things which you are not able to understand by your sense perception, but by this Shabda Praman, by this Shabda of the Gita, you have been able to understand. But the same Shabda is telling that there are some things which, even if Shabda tells, you cannot understand. Which can't be revealed to the limited intelligence that we have. So this is what Krishna is telling. It's not possible to completely grasp the question of how did we and when did we originate, and what was our state at the origin. Were we in the spiritual world? Were we in the Brahma Jyoti? Where were we? And how exactly, what happened that we fell in the material world? So Krishna is saying, right now you are not prepared to understand this concept. So far, does it make sense?
I think it is inconceivable, so it is not supposed to make sense.
No, it is
But
supposed to make sense
hence
that
that
it is not going to make sense.
that it is not going to make sense.
Yeah.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, but now let me explain why it cannot make sense to us right now. So let's delve into that part of the discussion. So what is Krishna saying? So whatever we understand in this world, when the question is, when did we come? When did we fall? Or how did we fall? So what was that moment of disruption when our spiritual identity and spiritual reality was disrupted, and then we got illusioned or we got covered over by material energy. So we want to go to that point, trace that point. Yeah. Flying in the time machine. So now here, a very important thing to understand is that certain things can be understood by our senses. Some things can be understood by logic and reasoning. Some things can be understood by hearing from authorities. But then there are some things which need some level of understanding and can come only when our consciousness has a has a crosses a threshold limit of purity. Otherwise, many spiritual concepts which for us here in this gathering make complete sense, for a commoner on the street, I don't think who saw the soul. No one has seen the soul. I don't believe in it. But for you and me here in this discussion, it's quite evident like the sun. Yeah. But it has taken us some amount of tapasya, some amount of sadhana to be able to perceive what is on the spiritual realm. Yeah. So it requires some amount of tapasya to understand certain things. And then some things, even if you perform tapasya, unless you get the grace of Lord, you can't understand. It's not by your own purity that you and me can understand. We require the grace of Lord and we require the blessing of Lord to understand. Yeah. And for some things, we need to go back to the spiritual world to really understand. So this is one of those things which requires the grace of the Lord and which requires us to be back there, to be to get a make complete sense of the whole thing. And why is it? It is because our entire perception of reality is based on 3 dimensions of space and a dimension of time. Yeah. So anything that we can grasp is within the closed box of space and time. 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. Now, if there is something which is beyond time, we cannot make sense of it. So the question is that in the spiritual realm, the time doesn't exist the way it exists in the material world. In the material world, time has 3 features: past, present, and future. Yeah. But in the spiritual world, time doesn't exert its influence the way in the form of past, present, and future. Because by when you say past, present, and future, it means that there is there is something which was there, now something which is not there, and in future something which is not there will come about. Yeah. So therefore you have birth, and then there's growth, then there's adulthood, there's old age, there's disease, there's death. So this is what time does in the material world. It puts us in a box. Yeah. So while we are caught up in that box of times past, present, and future, we can't understand about the concept of time in the spiritual world, where time is just in the present tense. There's no past and no future. Everyone is so absorbed in the present moment that past and future, past denotes destruction and future denotes creation. So those elements of destruction and creation, which are which are in the realm of this material world, they don't exist in the spiritual world. So therefore, it is not possible for us to grasp with our intelligence, which is constrained within time, to be able to factor that in. And then another thing which, like Srila Prabhupada would quote an example. Very, if you have not been able to follow through with what we discussed, this example will help us. So there were 3 learned pandits, and they were standing by discussing philosophy. And suddenly, as they were standing near a tal tree, a crow flew from the tree's branch, and at the same time, a tal fruit fell down. So the first philosopher, he said, actually the tal fruit fell, and that was the cause, and the effect was because out of fear the crow flew away. The second Pandit said, no, it's the other way around. The crow flew away from the branch, and by the momentum created by that crow, this tal fruit, which was already ripened, it fell down on the ground. And then they started arguing back and forth, discussing the mechanics. What could have caused what, whether it was the tal tree, tal fruit falling, or whether it was the crow flying, which happened first. Now, meanwhile, they were discussing, and then they were not coming to any conclusion. Then they looked for this third philosopher, Pandit, and he said, "Are, let us, please allow us to have a conclusion on this. Can you give your inputs of what exactly might have happened?" And this third Pandit, what was he doing? He had broken open the tal fruit, and he was nicely enjoying the succulent, luscious fruit. And he said, I don't have time to answer now. Let me finish this. So what does Srila Prabhupada is trying to say based on this is that one person is saying, oh, the jiva, never fell from the spiritual world. Another is saying the jiva was there in the spiritual world and fell from the spiritual world. But the third person, the intelligent one, is saying that now that I am here, what am I supposed to do? I am supposed to clear myself of this place. Agar, if I have contracted malaria, there's no point going and searching which mosquito bit me. Kisne kaata tha wo? Kaun sa machhar tha? Yeah. You can keep searching, but that is not going to cure your malaria. Now that we understand that we have got a disease, Bhavaroga, the best thing and the only thing we should be focusing on is how to overcome this disease. And not to see that, okay, kaun sa mosquito bite se hua. Yeah. And so therefore, relishing that tala fruit is relishing this path of bhakti. Because this path of bhakti is going to gradually purify all the layers of contaminations which has covered the soul. And then as the soul gets purified from all these levels of contamination on the body and on the mind, then swayam eva sfuratyada. Then naturally these subtle realities will start making sense. And therefore Krishna, what is his recommendation? Na rupam asyeha mrashopalakshate nanto na chadir na cha sampratishta ashwathamena suvirudha moolam asanga shastrena dradena chitva. Don't worry about finding the beginning of this complex enmeshed tree of material existence. Understand that we need to endeavor on cutting out this tree. We need to work on going to the Parampadam. And that's Krishna's recommendation to resolve this Jiva fall issue.
Yes, Prabhu. I think Radhanath Swami Maharaj also says that it is not that you can attain or you can take such an understanding. It's always to be given through sincerity and seva. So thank you very much for making, and the Lord is known as Adokshaj, beyond senses. So thank you for making this inconceivable concept more conceivable for us.
Making the inconceivability conceivable.
Yes.
That's what we are trying to do.
Should we move on to the second question, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. Yes.
In one of the more peculiar or beautiful translations of the Gita, His Divine Grace translates Na tad bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha as the supreme abode of mind is not illumined by sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity.
Mhm.
So, just like we perceive the sun or we perceive fire, we perceive electricity in our own way in this conditioned world. But how can we imagine or how can we get a taste of what the absolute liberated state
Mhm.
looks like? That would be part number one of the question. And part number two of the question would be about 5 minutes from my house, there is the one of the headquarters of the Ramakrishna Mission.
Mhm.
And when I was in the seventh standard Prabhu, I had by hearted the Pandra Adhyay, and there was a Gita Shlok competition
Mhm.
going on there. So it is the fate of, again, I have had the great fortune of never reading their Bhashya very directly, but I've heard that they believe that the ultimate reality is about becoming God, becoming the controller, and floating as a undifferentiated spiritual energy. So, is that the spiritual reality, or is there another spiritual reality that exists? So, those are the two big questions.
Okay, so the last question was about where did we come from, and this question is where are we going? What will be our existence looking like there? So these two are the two extremes of the spectrum. First one was, how was the state and time where we got covered up? How did it look like and how did it actually happen? Now the next piece of the story is, of the puzzle is, okay, when we go back, when we get liberated, what would that liberated state look like? Different uh, spiritual traditions have different understandings, different conceptions, different uh, mm, ideas about the same. Some say that, okay, when you attain liberation, right now we are in a no one will argue on the fact that we are in a bound state, because we are forced um, to to take a birth in this world. We are forced to grow old, we are forced to get diseased, and we are forced to die. So definitely it's a bound state, and there are things which we don't want to do, but our conditions propel and impel us. There's anger, there's lust, there's envy, greed, pride, all of these things. We don't want to get enmeshed, but by force we are being propelled. So no one will argue on the fact that we are conditioned. Hmm? Now, from this conditioned stage, when I go to the liberated state, what would that state be like? What name do I give it? Hmm? Right now, I know how the conditioned state looks like, but can you give me um, mm, a trailer of the movie of the liberated state? Hmm? Some say that, okay, you become God. Now you can say anything and get away with it, because in the bound state, you and me are equally knowledgeable about it. So someone can say, okay, you will become God. That sounds quite interesting. एक बंदे के टी शर्ट पे लिखा था, I was an atheist until. मेरे को लगा यार until मतलब क्या हो गया, तो फिर उसके पीछे लिखा until I realized I am God. I was an atheist until I realized I am God. क्या कॉन्सेप्शन है, मैं ही भगवान हूँ. So that is, you can say and get away with it. Yeah, we are no like people who don't have spiritual realization, God realization, which is 99.99% of the planet, will buy your product very excitedly, because who doesn't want to become God? We want to become small gods. Now someone says that you can become big God, very lucrative to purchase. Yeah. So some say you become God in the liberated state. Some say that once you get liberated, you become a light. You don't have any body, you don't have any form, you just exist. You are just hanging out there. Where? Out there. What is that out there? No, it's just there. So there is Nirvishesha Brahman. That's the liberated state. So these are certain conceptions. And whereas we, on the path of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we speak about this living entity. What is the definition of mukti as per the Srimad Bhagavatam? Muktir hitva anyatha rupam swarupena vyavasthiti. Mukti is not becoming arupam. Mukti is not Ishvara rupam. Mukti is hitva anyatha rupam, means giving up the false identities, false forms, swarupena vyavasthiti, getting situated in one's true natural constitutional position and identity. So what the Bhagavatam and the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy is talking of is that number one, you don't become God, you don't become a light, but you become you remain a person, but a person instated in your real transcendental position. So this is what is our proposition. Now you will say, but how do I believe you? Because just like that guy is saying that I can become God, that guy is saying I can become light out there, who doesn't have anything to do, anything to, get tangled with. Those things seem to be more lucrative. तो तुम्हारा प्रोडक्ट में तो इतना दम नहीं है, मतलब तुम तो दास बना रहे हो उधर. No, it's not about how you feel or how you don't feel. It's about what is the Shastra Praman. So let's go to Gita. What is Krishna's assertion? In the 15th chapter, Krishna is making it crystal clear for us to understand. 16th verse. Dvaima purusho loke kshara akshara evacha shara sarvani bhutani kutastho akshara uchyate. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every living entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every living entity is called infallible. Then the 17th verse. Uttama purushastu anya paramatmeti udaharata yo lokatrayam avishya bibarti avyaya ishvara. Besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. Then 18th verse, Yasmad Ksharam Atitoham Aksharat Apichottama Atosmi Loke Vedecha Prathita Purushottama. Because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. So, what is Krishna's prescription to us? He is very clearly saying that in this world there are two types of living beings, Shara and Akshara. Shara are the bound and the conditioned living entities, and as we have discussed, that we cannot dispute the fact that we are bound. We have enough evidences that we are bound. We are in a state where we would not ideally like to be. We are bound by our physical body. We are bound by our mental conditionings. So we are definitely bound. So that is one type of living entities who are bound. Then Akshara. Akshara are those who are liberated, those who are existing in the spiritual reality, who are freed from all of these conditionings of the mind and senses. Right now, we are driven and directed by our mind and senses against our desire, our urges, our temptations make us do certain things which are abominable, and later we have to repent them. Yeah, but in the liberated state, you are not perturbed by such temptations, by such agitations, because Krishna is saying, Devi he esha gunamai mama maya duratya mameva ye prapadyante mama maya tarantite. That someone who takes shelter of Krishna's lotus feet, hmm, that person can be is released from the network of Maya's illusion. And therefore, uh, that is the second category of living entities who are the liberated, who are, as we discussed, situated in their constitutional nature. Kshara Sarvani Bhutani. Kshara refers to Bhutani. Bhuta means the elements, the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. So those living entities who are imprisoned by the five elements are called Bhutani. Prithvi, Agni, Vayu, Jal, Akash. So these five elements are actually imprisoning us. So these are the Bhutani. And then Akshara Kutastha. Kutastha means who have a spiritual form. Kuta, that which is the most sublime. Stha, situated in the most sublime identity. That is the spiritual identity. So the liberated state souls are situated in that spiritual identity. Now then Krishna is saying that, but don't mistake that in the liberated state, the Kutastha is God. Because he's saying, as we discussed, we saw in the 17th verse, Uttama Purushastu Anya. ये शर और अक्षर तो है, एक तो बाउंड है, एक जो लिबरेट हो गया बाय वेरियस प्रोसेसेस ऑफ भक्ति और ज्ञान, लिबरेट हो गया. बट डोंट थिंक दैट द कूटस्थ becomes God, because uttama purushastu anya, even beyond the bound and even beyond the liberated, there is a anya purusha, param atmeti udaratam. We are just atmas. There is a paramatma. And then Krishna says in the 18th verse, in the 17th verse itself, that he is the one who maintains these three worlds. And the same is reinforced in the Katha Upanishad. Nityo nityanam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman. That there are the plural nitya living, eternal living entities, and there's a singular living entity. There are plural conscious beings, and there is one singular capital C conscious being. And this capital C conscious being, this capital E eternal being, is the one who maintains all the other beings in the material or the spiritual world. So this is Gita's verdict. This is Krishna's verdict, that the liberated state doesn't mean that one becomes God. One gets reinstated in one's position as a servant of God, as a lover of God. And those five states are described in the various scriptures, that one can serve God in five rasas: Shantaras, Dasyaras, Sakyaras, Vatsalyaras, and Madhuryaras. And interestingly, we began this chapter with discussion that this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. We were talking that this world is not an illusion but a reflection. Illusion means that which is not there is visible, but reflection means when you look at the reflection, you get a glimpse into what would be if you just it's inversely proportional. It's inversion of what is the actual. So you see, in this material world, there are all of these relationships. There is Shantaras, there is Shantaras where, all the vanaspatis, aushadhis, the grasses, the trees, Shantaras, they are not active, they are passive, they have a passive consciousness. Dasyaras, you have servant-master relationship in this world. You have Sakhya, friendship in this world. You have Vatsalya, parental relationships in this world. And you have Madhurya, conjugal relationships in this world. And so when these things are there in the reflection, how can you eliminate them in the real image? How can you say that the real image is just light? None of these relationships. So something which is there in the material world is absent in the spiritual world, means spiritual world is less than the material world, or what? So what we need to understand is what is considered the highest in the spiritual world will be the lowest in the material world. Yeah. So what is the highest in the spiritual world is a Parkiya Rasa. Parkiya Rasa is where Radha and Krishna are not married. So they are having a Parkiya relationship. And they are eternal concerts. They don't need a marriage to make that relation formal, because that relationship is not made by some laws or rules and regulations. That is the relationship which gives rise to all other relationships. Everything is emanating from them. So that Parkiya Ras, which is highest in the spiritual world, is the lowest, most degraded extramarital affairs, the most degraded thing in this material world. Yeah. And what is now when you talk of the highest is the, and when reflected down becomes the lowest. And at a neutral state in between, you find the Brahman realization, where there is none of these rasas, neither Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, or Madhurya. None of these rasas are there. It's just a state of undifferentiated spiritual existence, where neither the material Mahamaya Shakti works, nor the spiritual Yogamaya Shakti works. It's just the Sat nature, the nature of eternity and knowledge, which is there without any bliss. In terms of the Ladini Shakti, the impersonal bliss is there, but Brahmananda is there. But the spiritual Yogamaya Shakti is not there. Yeah, so therefore, the neutral state is the Brahman realization. So when you talk of what is it that we become when we get liberated, you have a range. This is the range. You can be on the Brahman realization where you are, so fed up with this material world and material relationships, you don't want to have any relationships, and you just want to be. So that's the Brahman. But then above that, there's the possibility of spiritual relationships with the Lord, and that's what is being offered to all of us by Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think it's 15th Adhyaya is Iti Guhyatamam Shastram. It's certainly very confidential, and but whether we are rightly placed to listen to what you're giving us or not, you've still given us an answer. Thank you very much for that. And I think as Chaitanya Sharan Prabhu comments on Radhanath Swami Maharaj's book, The Journey Home, as you take the path to your journey home, you have to you meet with many other paths before, and even the book also looks at Maharaj's experiencing other paths before he comes back to his journey home. So thank you very much. And should we go on with the last question, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu.
We see that there are different Puranas that look at different versions of what the Supreme Personality of Godhead is. Even within the Hindu tradition, there are different ways, the Shankara school, the Madhva school, and other schools of thought. And even if you observe for a mundane person like me, the experience is similar to that of when you open the television channel. There are normally documentaries on Hinduism. It normally begins by some foreigner announcing, some narrator announcing that in Hinduism there are 33 crore types of gods. And that in itself gives a understanding that our tradition is a supermall where on basis of where you're born, on basis of what your taste is. You have so many different versions of divinity. So then how do we conclude that bhakti and Krishna are the ultimate conclusion?
So yeah, naso rishe yasya matam na bhinnad dharmasya tattva nihitam guhaya mahajano yena gata supantha. So the verse you were quoting from Mahabharata is the verse which says that it's very difficult to ascertain the conclusion and the essence of the Vedic literatures. Naso Rishayasya Matam na Bidnat. There is no, like, there are no two sages who have the same opinion. So even about the absolute truth, which is supposed to be the absolute truth, there are many different versions. Version A, version B, version C, version D. So we wonder whether it is absolute or whether it is relative to who is defining the absolute. So that's something to ponder about. And even if you look at, now we're coming to Vedas, there's a vast collection of literatures within the Vedas. Um, there are the four Vedas, the Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda, and within each of these Vedas there are four, categories: Brahmanas, Aranyakas, so and so forth. And then you have, the Upanishads, which are part of the Vedas, and then you have the Puranas, Upapuranas, and Puranas also in mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And there, with such plethora of literature, to come to a conclusion in a short span of life, where we are manda sumanda matayo manda bhagya upardita. First of all, we are manda. We don't have the sharp spiritual intelligence to understand spiritual subject matters. Manda bhagya, which is that even if someone is inquisitive and wants to understand whether that person will get to the right path or the right person, that also, there are so many flukes in the name of spirituality. Upadhrita, always disturbed. The moment you think I should practice some spirituality, you get some other distraction or temptation and you get carried away. So with this, it is so difficult to, within the short span of our life, to arrive at a conclusion. But how crucial it is for us to arrive at a conclusion. Otherwise, we are just doing window shopping of a shopping mall. So with the Veda having such vast spectrum of literatures to get to a conclusion. And now even the religious traditions where there's just one book, the Holy Bible or the Holy Quran, still there are so many different denominations and uh, realizations of what the path is and what the goal is. So then with the Vedic tradition, how do you, with so many books and so much literature, with the limited time that we have, can we arrive at a conclusion? The good news is we can, because we have Krishna's words in the form of the Gita and all the sampradayas, whether you take Shankara Sampradaya, Madhva Sampradaya, or Rudra Sampradaya, any sampradaya who is bona fide, one thing which is common in all these sampradayas is the Bhagavad Gita. Shripad Shankaracharya, he says, Eko Shastro Devaki Putra Gita, Eko Devo Devaki Nandane Eva, Eko Mantra Tasya Namani Yani Karmani Api Tasya Devasya Seva. एक ही शास्त्र रखो, देवकी पुत्र गीता, कृष्णा की कही हुई गीता. बाकी शास्त्र पढ़ो ना पढ़ो, बाकी शास्त्र समझ में आए ना आए, देवकी पुत्र गीता, कृष्ण के द्वारा कही गई भगवत गीता, that's the sum and substance and essence of everything. And that's the conclusion of Shripad Sankaracharya, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and all the different acharyas, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So now let's zoom into the Bhagavad Gita. What does Bhagavad Gita talk about this? Krishna says in the 15th verse, Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritirjnanam apohanam cha vedesya sarver ahamevya vedyo vedanta krit veda videva chaham. So the question is, what is the conclusion of the Vedas? What are the Vedas supposed to reveal to us? Krishna is saying, Vedescha sarver, from all the Vedas, from all the body of Vedic literature, only some of which is already lost in oblivion of time. But even with all of that body of literature which we have or we don't have, Krishna is saying Vedesha Sarvair, from all the Vedas, what is it that is supposed to be known? Aham eva Vedyo, to know Janati Purushottama, to know Krishna as the Supreme Lord and the source of everything, the cause of all causes. Krishna is saying that's it. That is the purpose of all the Vedas. That is what all the Vedas are trying to actually, impregnate upon us. So someone may say, ये तो आपका opinion लग रहा है, because some other person may have other opinions. So aham eva vedyo, Krishna is saying, I understand the Vedas. So aham eva, I only understand the Vedas in full. So different people may claim, oh, I also understand the Veda. I also understand something about the Veda. Krishna is saying, you understand partially, I understand in full. So Ved with, Krishna is saying, I am the knower of the Vedas. And someone may dispute that. Oh, how can you claim to be the only knower of the Vedas? Krishna is saying, wait a minute, Vedanta Krit. भाई ये वेद और वेदांत जो है ना, मैंने ही लिखे हैं. Don't question the author about what the book means. So Krishna is saying, in the form of Vyasadeva, I only wrote all of these Vedic literatures, compiled the Vedanta Sutras. So when I am telling you that Vedesha Sarver Aham Eva Vedyo, that all the purpose of all the Vedas is to seek out that Supreme Purushottama, then you must accept that. Yeah. And then, having accepted that, what is one supposed to do? That also Krishna says. Let's read the 19th verse. Yo mam evam sammudho janati purushottamam sasarvavid bhajati mam sarvabhavena bharata. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. Someone who understands me as Purushottama, Sarvavit, he is understood to have gained all the conclusions of all the Vedic literatures. Sarvavit. And then what does he do after gaining all of that Vedic knowledge? Bhajati Mam. He worships me. He offers his homage to me. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. This is what a person who has all the knowledge and conclusion of the Vedas does. He performs the path of, engages in the path of bhakti. So therefore, the conclusion of all the Vedic literatures is to understand Krishna as the cause of all causes, as Purushottama, the best amongst all living beings who is maintaining everyone. And then knowing this, worshipping him with bhakti. So this is what the conclusion as articulated and presented by the creator of the Vedas. So a mechanic can't argue with the manufacturer, the designer of the car, that how the car should be repaired. Yeah. So when Krishna, the manufacturer, is telling, this is what all the Vedas are trying to explain to us. We better subscribe to it. And then Krishna is saying, iti guhyatamam shastram idam muktam mayanaka etad buddha buddhimadan syad kritakrityasya cha bharata. So Krishna is saying guhyatamam shastram. Guhya is confidential. Guhyatam is more confidential. Guhyatamam is most confidential. So Krishna is saying this is the most confidential understanding of all the Shastras, all the Vedic literatures. And this has now been explained by me. So Krishna has given the most confidential knowledge in this 15th chapter. And that most confidential knowledge is leading us from the material world to the spiritual world by worshipping the cause of both the material and the spiritual world, Krishna, Purushottama. And that's why this chapter is called Purushottam Yoga, the yoga by which we connect to Purushottam. Because once you connect to Purushottam, then you disconnect from this material world. And as you disconnect from the material world, you are unbound from this bound state and attain liberation. You go from the reflection to the reality. And that's the conclusion which Krishna has portrayed and presented, has revealed actually to us. So does it satisfy your query?
Yes, Prabhu. With our nainam paschanta achetasah, with our eyes not being developed, we cannot. But as Shankaracharya himself said, that Bhagavad Gita kinchita adhita yamena charsha, and that is what is promised to us on the least. Because if the Pancham Adhyay, I think the only punch I know is of the fruit punch drink. But thank you very much for answering this question, this very confidential question in such depth and such lucidity. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Gopinath Prabhu. So thus we conclude the chapter 15 as we concluded upon the conclusion of all the Vedic literatures. We also conclude chapter 15, which is the most confidential knowledge. And then next session we will move on to chapter 16, which is about the demoniac and divine natures. That what are the different characteristics of divine and demoniac nature, and what is it that makes some people divine in nature and some demoniac in nature. So that is what we will discuss in our upcoming sessions. Then we have only 3 more chapters to go. Yeah, 15 out of 18 have been covered. 3 more to go. So any questions or comments or reflections anyone would like to share, they can unmute or post on the chat box. If not, we will then conclude our session for today. And there is Pushya Abhishek festival in the temple at Radha Gopinath temple. And since morning, thousands, hundreds of devotees have come together plucking flowers. So 1 ton of flowers coming from Vrindavan, Indore, Bangalore, various places have been plucked by devotees. So thousands and thousands of flowers, and lakhs and millions of flower petals. So, and all of these millions of flower petals will be all mixed together and showered on the Lord. And then no one will be able to point out, okay, I did this petal. It's all our offerings will go together to the Lord. And Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam. So we have an opportunity. So thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai.